Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alyssa Pugh, and I am the GRC Content Manager for Tandem, an information security and compliance application. Today, I am here to talk with you about 10 things to include in remote work IT risk assessments and how this type of assessment promotes operational resiliency in our businesses. To start, I'd like to ask the question, where were you when we were given 15 days to slow the spread? Feel free to go ahead and type in the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on the questions as we go through our session today, and I would love to engage with you during our time together. For me, at the time, I was the Tandem support manager. My team had already gone home for the day, and I had just finished wiping down their desks with what I didn't know was the last supply of Clorox wipes I would see until October. We knew COVID was a risk, and we had already taken some steps to social distance, but when we received the city recommendation to shift to remote operations entirely, that was a whole new ballgame. But we weren't alone. As the country headed into a lockdown to slow the spread of COVID-19, many organizations were faced with the question, how can we continue to conduct business when we can't be in the office? Well, this is where remote work came in. The ability for employees to work from home and do so effectively was substantial in this time of uncertainty. As remote work environments flourished, so did a new generation of security concerns. Business could continue, but at what cost? The conversation quickly changed from large multinational organizations to small community financial institutions. The cybersecurity community is now asking, how can we ensure a high level of security when so much of the data and technology is out of our hands? I believe the first step in answering this question can be found in a strong remote work IT risk assessment. Some of you may be asking, okay, so what's an IT risk assessment? For those of you who may not be familiar with the underlying concept, here is a 30-second crash course. An IT risk assessment involves the process of identifying threats and vulnerabilities, bad things that could happen to your systems and data. With that information in mind, controls should be implemented to reduce the identified risks. You should then validate the sufficiency of those controls and use that information to determine ongoing risk management plans, which can help you identify any additional risks and start the process all over again. So for a simple example, you might consider the risk of a fire in your data center. Those things can get pretty hot. Realizing a fire could destroy your systems or data is identifying a risk. So to manage the risk of a fire, you might have redundant AC, fire suppression systems, smoke alarms, things of that nature. These are controls you implement. Let's say an auditor found that your heat detection system was outdated during a control review. You can then use this information to create an ongoing plan to mitigate this risk, and then assess the risk of a heat detection system failure. So how does all of this apply to remote work, and what value is there in conducting a remote work IT risk assessment? Well, from my point of view, there are 4 primary reasons to conduct a remote work IT risk assessment. Number 1, it can help you comply with laws and regulations about data privacy and information security. That's the C in GRC. But since this is the risk management and governance track, we are going to focus on these other 3 areas for today. A second reason is because it can help you discover vulnerabilities which may be facing your systems and data that you may not be aware of. It can also help you identify what controls you need to have implemented in your remote environments. And finally, through a gap analysis, you can determine if there are any areas that need additional protection, which is common for up-and-coming remote environments. So our primary topic today is 10 things you should consider including in your remote work IT risk assessment. As part of that, we are going to look at a variety of risks, vulnerabilities, controls, and threats. And as a disclaimer, this is going to look a little bit like a countdown, but it isn't really. Each of these items we discussed today is important to consider when securing your remote work function, and some may be more applicable to your business than others. The purpose of this conversation is to expand our horizons, consider a variety of risks and controls, and then use that information to improve our resilience as we move throughout the rest of this year. So let's go ahead and jump on into number 10 on our list, which is what I'm going to call unauthorized data transmission. That name says it all. This is about the risk you face when data is removed from your systems and transmitted to unauthorized systems. When it comes to working remotely, some unauthorized transmission of data happens due to the convenience over security factor. To get the job done more quickly, employees may be tempted to use personal devices for business purposes. For example, they might use things like personal email or removable media, or perhaps the most prevalent, personal cloud storage devices like Dropbox or Google Drive as a way to transmit data from one system to another. Sometimes unauthorized transmission of data is not intentional, and it can happen due to proximity of being in close contact with others, family members, roommates, hipsters at the coffee house. I had an interesting conversation with a security auditor not too long ago about this very topic. He posed the question, should family members of remote staff be required to sign non-disclosure agreements? Now, that might be a little extreme. Non-disclosure is typically addressed in employee contracts. However, sometimes walls are very thin and living rooms are very open. Another form to consider is unencrypted communications. Ross from HR and Monica from billing likely don't have the same security know-how as you do, and their home networks probably do not offer the same levels of security as what is offered in the office. So I'm curious, these are just a few examples we've seen. What are some other ways that you've seen data removed from your organization's network? Feel free to go ahead and leave a comment in the chat about that. While you're typing those in, I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. Why do we care about this? Well, unauthorized transmission of data, be it intentional or unintentional, can result in the unauthorized disclosure, misuse, destruction of your data. So those are just a few ways this can happen and are an important factor to consider in your remote work IT risk assessment. Thankfully, each of these risks we discussed today also comes with compensating controls. So one of those key controls you'll want to have in your remote work IT risk assessment is data encryption. Keep your friends close and your encryption closer. In your remote work IT risk assessment, you really should be asking a few questions. First, is sensitive data allowed to be stored on remote staff workstations? And if so, is that data encrypted? Then, when remote staff need to transmit data to and from outside locations, like your company network or a cloud service provider, is that data encrypted in transit? Finally, when the data reaches its destination, is the data encrypted effectively there as well? If you answered no or I'm not sure to any of those questions, those are actionable items you can begin researching now to help manage your remote work IT risk. If you answered yes to those questions, well, first, congratulations, but I have an extra credit assignment for you. I want you to think about and answer the question, are you sure and can you prove it? I had the opportunity to meet with a group of bank examiners last year, and one of the concerns they expressed was that in many smaller organizations they worked with, there was an apparent disconnect between the org's risk management and audit functions. I also had the opportunity to ask a group of risk managers who work for financial institutions what their organizations did to ensure their teams securely transmitted data. Participants were asked to select all that applied, and what we found was that the majority required a VPN for any business data, or they provided training over how to secure home networks. 20% went above and beyond and said that they actually audited employee home networks, while 11% said they don't do any of these things. You see, as risk managers, we really care about ensuring our risk is reduced to an acceptable level. However, implementing controls is only half the battle. Controls must also be validated to ensure they are functioning as expected, and this is a vital key to ensuring resilience. So I'm curious to know, what are you doing to ensure that your business data is secure? As you're thinking about that, and don't forget to leave a comment in the chat, let's talk about 4 ways you can validate the control of data encryption. Number 1, if you have them, you should review your data encryption policy and procedures. If you don't, now is a good time to start. These should define what data should be encrypted and can help you assess whether expectations are being met or not. Number 2, check device configuration settings. Are devices configured in accordance with the company's policies and procedures? Number 3, perform security assessments like vulnerability assessments and penetration tests. Have someone else look at your systems and tell you if data is being adequately encrypted. Then use this information to inform your risk management practices. And 4, oversee third-party arrangements. Request security documentation from them, like SOC reports or other proof of testing that validates they have implemented the same level of controls that you would implement for the data they store. Whether this control is about reducing the risk of someone eavesdropping on data sent over one of your team members' home networks, or if it's about ensuring malicious actors can't access data on a workstation, data encryption is going to be a valuable control to consider in your remote work IT risk assessment. Number 8 on our list is what I'm going to call exploitation by cyber attack. When we're talking about this risk, we're talking about a wide range of events that could disrupt, disable, or maliciously control someone's workstation, or could grant the actor unauthorized access to data, which can result in a whole lot of problems. In today's age, I would be surprised if this was not one of your top risks in any kind of technical assessment, but it does take on a unique flavor when it comes to remote work IT risk management for a few reasons. First, as we've already briefly discussed, remote work offers a very different environment. I remember one phone call I had with an IT specialist for a community bank. He was asking about how to update their BCP to address remote workstations. I asked about their environment, expecting to hear something about laptops or VPNs. So you can imagine my surprise when he answered, "Well, I'm not sure just yet. Best Buy is supposed to be shipping the systems to their homes this week." Another I visited with said that they didn't have enough remote workstations to send home with their laptops to send home with their remote workers. I'm sure there are many other stories like these, and in any of these kinds of scenarios, there are issues with a lack of controls and greater structural inconsistencies that can cause something like exploitation by cyber attack to be particularly damaging. From another perspective, there's a different awareness of threats associated with remote work. Home is, or at least should be, a safe space. When you trade the office for home, you trade security awareness posters for hang in their cat posters. You trade conversations with colleagues about security for conversations with 4-year-olds about grapes. Working from home results in this Frankenstein kind of problem for risk managers, where the safety of your home collides with the need for security awareness you are surrounded by when you work in an office space. I'll be referring to some outside sources today, and for further reading, all of the sources can be found on the final references slide in the deck. That said, 2 fascinating figures from the IBM cost of a data breach report last year indicated that 76% of their survey respondents said remote work would increase the time to identify and contain a data breach, while 70% of those respondents said that it would likewise increase the cost of a data breach. Now, why do you think that is? Malicious actors are sneaky. It can take months and even years sometimes to discover certain types of attacks in our current environments. The long-term security effects of remote work are yet to be seen, but to ensure we can be resilient when things begin coming to light, it's imperative that we assess the risk of exploitation by cyber attack on our current remote environments. The cyber attack of ransomware is a particular concern these days. And if ransomware attacks have taught us anything, it's that data backup is essential in recovering from many types of destructive cyber events. The problem is that remote systems are often overlooked when it comes to data backup processes and procedures. So the first thing you'll want to know is what the company data backup policy is for backing up remote systems. Start by answering the question, do you have a data backup policy? And if so, does it address remote systems, or do you address this in another way? It might be difficult to back up employee systems that are remote. So a second question to ask would be, do you require employees to store sensitive data on the organization's network? Another way of looking at it would be, if their local machine became compromised, lost, or stolen, would you be able to get your data back? One way to verify your data backup procedures are effective would be to examine your most recent backup restoration results. Even if you do backup remote systems, the data is of no use to you if you cannot successfully restore it. So you should be testing these items periodically to ensure that this control would promote resiliency in your remote work function. One popular gateway attackers like to use to exploit your systems can be found in social engineering. Social engineering has a unique effect related to working from home. One reason, and probably pertinent to the reason that so many are working from home right now, our minds are elsewhere. You know, kids, politics, pandemics, just to name a few minor examples. And to make a difficult situation worse, malicious actors are capitalizing on the distractions. On July 30th of last year, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, published an advisory on COVID-related cybercrime. Among other threats, FinCEN highlights phishing as one of particular concern. In the statement, they say that since January 2020, tens of thousands of new domains have been registered with terms related to COVID-19 and/or disaster and healthcare response, such as quarantine, vaccine, CDC, with many including or mimicking names of companies that provide or enable teleworking capabilities. And we've seen those domains be put into effect. In August, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, published an alert regarding a particularly prevalent phishing scam about a malicious cyber actor spoofing COVID-19 loan relief web pages. The email had a subject of SBA application review and proceed and asks recipients to click a link to a mock web page designed to steal their credentials. So super friendly stuff going on right there. While email phishing is by far the most common form of social engineering, it isn't the only one. A recent notification published by the FBI highlighted a recent trend in vishing attacks, or phishing via phone calls using VoIP platforms. You know them, you've received them. I personally have won about a dozen cruises. My car's warranty has been about to expire for 3 years now, and apparently my great-grandma needs a Home Depot gift card. What all of this means is that malicious actors are capitalizing on current environments and are going to try and stop at nothing to try and phish unsuspecting individuals however they can. And your remote work IT risk assessments should account for that. So how do you prevent things like this? While you can't stop attackers from trying to compromise your team, you can teach your team what to look for and how to respond when they are social engineered. You know the old saying, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Well, teach a man to watch for fish and you will thank yourself later. If you aren't talking about and providing regular resources to your teams related to remote work, like the importance of encryption, anti-malware, physical security, strong passwords, mobile device security, and recognizing and responding to security incidents, this is a great way to build resilience and is something you can start doing today to reduce your remote work IT risk. Security awareness training is often viewed as a compliance requirement, and it's not infallible because of the human element. However, providing helpful training certainly can't hurt when so much of the data and technology is not in your hands. If you aren't quite sure where to get started with training on remote work practices, I have 5 great resources I would like to recommend for you. First, CISA has been on point with their resources in the last year. Whether you need ideas on topics to include in your training or just a solid resource to share with your team, I would recommend Security Tip 15-002 over home network security. This resource goes over why securing home networks is important, as well as provides several recommendations for practical steps your teams can take to secure their home environments, such as patching software, adjusting default configurations, and using anti-malware on their home devices. A second resource I want to recommend is the CIS Controls Telework and Small Office Network Security Guide. This resource is longer and gets a little more technical, but it offers great insights on how networks function. It goes over types of devices that might be part of an employee's home network, and it provides a checklist for employees to follow to make sure that their home networks are secure. Last year, the National Credit Union Association, or NCUA, published a risk alert called Cybersecurity Considerations for Remote Work. This guidance, while intended for credit unions, really applies to all of us. It addresses risks facing remote workers and provides actionable steps you can take to prepare employees for preventing and responding to security incidents. Another resource is the Federal News Network Executive Briefing over Securing the Remote Workforce, sponsored by RSA. Designed to be shared with senior management and the board of directors, this resource is an excellent brief summary describing the challenges of remote work and security needs as we move into the future. And finally, if you're not sharing one already, I would encourage you to subscribe to a security awareness software application. There are a number of good solutions on the market designed to help educate and test your employees on their preparedness for social engineering attacks. So these are just a few available resources I've found particularly helpful, but I'm curious, what resources have you found helpful when it comes to training staff on remote work practices? Go ahead and leave a comment in the chat and feel free to let us know. When it comes to determining if your security awareness training program is effective, there are 4 things you'll want to look at. Number 1, what do your training policy and procedures say about training on remote work? Number 2, how frequently are you conducting training? Is it an annual thing or is it part of your culture? Number 3, are you training on the right topics? So is it timely and is it relevant? And 4, and what I'd say is the most important, are your employees learning? With an effective security awareness training program, everyone can feel a sense of responsibility for securing their remote environments. Number 4 on our list of things to include in your remote work IT risk assessment is unauthorized use of information assets. This is basically a fancy way of saying your team using work things for non-work purposes. When we, and more importantly, our workstations are in the office, yes, there's some risk of unauthorized use, but when we take our laptops home and set up shop in the living room, it can be challenging to have the system and the data so easily accessible by spouses, roommates, or children who want to binge watch the latest Marvel installment. Pets who think the keyboard keys look like snacks, and yes, this happened to one of my team members during quarantine. Or even ourselves when all of the other devices in the house are booked. I say all of this to drive home the point that the risk of unauthorized use does increase in a remote environment. Last year, one ISO I know sent a company-wide notification to remind staff about their acceptable use policy. He encouraged everyone to not use company systems to run personal software for gaming, streaming, and trading. Unauthorized use happens, but it's important to account for that in a remote work IT risk assessment because it could result in the unauthorized access, misuse, disclosure, or destruction of your company's systems and data. So besides an acceptable use policy, since we all know how much everyone loves to read those, how do you stop it? Well, one way would be to implement secure access restrictions. If your employees aren't running as local administrators, this significantly limits their ability to perform certain actions, like installing unauthorized software. And it can reduce the potential damage if some kind of malware is introduced to the environment. When it comes to limiting local administrator access, there are 4 things you'll want to do to make sure that you have this implemented correctly. First, if you have one, review your user access control policy and procedures. Are you seeing a trend yet? Define who is authorized to run as a local administrator and keep it to a minimum, especially for those working from home. 2, regularly review user access to make sure the right people have the right access. 3, check your configuration settings to make sure that for new systems, especially those just being shipped to the employee's house, employees don't accidentally get elevated privileges. And 4, finally, perform security assessments, like vulnerability assessments, to have someone else tell you if any users are running as local administrators when they shouldn't be. Going hand in hand with our previous control, our second thing to include in a remote work IT risk assessment is the potential use of unauthorized applications. In a remote work environment, an increased likelihood of unauthorized applications like video conferencing, messaging, file sharing may occur for business or personal purposes. If it happens, it could result in things like unauthorized disclosure to third parties, for those third parties that may not be authorized to see that type of data, or vulnerable applications being installed on your systems. I'm going to pick on one application in particular. As a result of the pandemic, Zoom reached the Kleenex Gold status every software developer hopes to reach. The moment that your company name becomes synonymous with the product, I mean, that's the dream, right? Zoom became a household name overnight, and since we were all working from home, authorized or not, it became a business name overnight as well. Unauthorized video conferencing apps may seem like a small thing. However, widespread use of freeware applications can expose a number of security issues and vulnerabilities, as we've seen. Some companies, like Zoom, have worked diligently to amend the vulnerabilities and have published pages on their websites about their security practices to be overly clear about their stance on protecting your data. But it's still a risk. According to a CISA alert, due to COVID-19, an increasing number of individuals and organizations are turning to online communication platforms such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams for online meetings. In turn, malicious cyber actors are hijacking these online meetings that aren't secured with passwords or that use unpatched software. I asked the same group of risk managers about their use of video conferencing platforms. What we found was that 47% were rock stars and said that they had performed due diligence. Surprisingly, though, more than half responded somewhat, no, or I don't know. Trust but verify is the mantra of the security community. What this shows, though, is that we are very trusting of software applications, which is good as long as we have done appropriate due diligence to ensure our third-party service providers care about our data as much as we do. So what can you do? When it comes to the risk of unauthorized applications, you should be asking and answering 3 questions. First, you should ask the question, what applications are being used? You can't protect what you don't know. You should also ask the question, what data is being stored in the applications? If sensitive or confidential information is being transmitted or stored by the application, you definitely want to know that, so that 3, you can ask the question, have we performed adequate third-party risk management? Do you know what data they store and how they protect your data? Who can access your data? What does your agreement with them say? What happens if their services become unavailable? Well, these are timeless principles that apply regardless of where your team works. The risks presented by unauthorized applications is definitely increased in a remote environment as we look to tools that can increase our productivity outside of the office. The last topic we're going to discuss today is effective patch management, perhaps one of the biggest hurdles when it comes to remote work. RSA discussed this very topic in one of their recent ebooks over cyber risk and the remote workforce. The booklet talks about how it can be more challenging to harden employee devices when they are outside of the workplace perimeter, and that security teams may not be as easily able to ensure employees keep their systems patched. So what can you do? Some questions to ask and answer regarding patch management include, does your patch management program outline how you plan to ensure remote systems connecting to the network are protected? How are you planning to update those systems? And besides operating system patches, how are you ensuring things like applications installed on employee systems and firmware are also being updated? Over the last few months, we have received several questions about how to patch remote systems. What we found is that it really comes down to three methods. Method one is to install updates when a device is connected to the organization's network. A pro of this method is that the company has more control over when patches are installed on the device. A con would be that devices may not always have the most recent patches, which could open up certain systems to vulnerabilities. Method two is to configure devices to automatically install updates. A pro of this method would be that the device will always have the latest patches, assuming your employees restart their systems every once in a while. A con would be that you can't test how it works or how it integrates with other applications on the system before it's installed. The question would be, is the risk worth the benefit of being able to patch the already vulnerable areas? Method number three is to install updates when your team presents devices for physical inspection. While this wasn't entirely an option during COVID, it is something to consider going forward. A pro is that a physical inspection allows your team to assess the device's physical state in addition to its logical state. A con would be finding the right balance with regard to frequency and inspection methods, since employees may live across the city or around the world. There are a lot of ways to make sure patches are installed, and even some applications to help you with this process. Ultimately, it's about finding the best solution for you and making sure that your systems are patched. If you have found a great way to manage patches, feel free to go ahead and leave a comment in the chat. I would love to hear from you on this topic. And with that, we have covered our 10 things to include in our remote work IT risk assessment. So as we wrap up today, I have some key takeaways and action steps for you. According to Presidential Policy Directive PPD-21, resilience is the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. In other words, resilience is the ability to identify the risks facing your organization and implement controls to manage that risk. Remote work is one small part of a bigger picture, but it is one with pressing and long-term consequences if steps aren't taken now to successfully govern and manage that risk. So, what can you do? Well, the first thing you should do sometime in the next week is determine what your remote workforce looks like. You can do this by asking a few questions. Number one, who works remotely? Do all of your staff work remotely, or is it just a subset, like maybe only certain positions? Number two, do you expect that number to change? Does your organization expect to have team members working remotely in the future, or will that number be decreasing? And on a very related note, how much longer do you plan to have staff working remotely? Is your team remote only due to the pandemic, or is this a strategic direction you want to go? Having answers to these questions can provide valuable objective data for you to consider when you are conducting your risk assessment. So your next step is to identify key risks, and here's how I would recommend you do that. First, block off an hour or two on your calendar sometime in the next month to create some focus time for yourself. Then create a list of the key risks you are facing. Start with the ones we covered today, and I have a more extensive resource for you at the very end. Then prioritize your risks by asking, how likely is it that this could occur, and how much damage could it cause? This will help you get a clear picture of the areas of highest need. With your risks in mind, you can then take steps to assess your control environment. Start by asking, what remote work controls do you have in place? Again, begin with the ones we started with today and ask the questions, do we encrypt data? Is our remote work training adequate? Things like that. Once you know if the controls are in place and how they reduce risk, you can then ask if the controls reduce risk to an acceptable level. And if not, ask the question, what do we need to do to improve? Another term for this is performing a gap analysis. It's about finding the difference between where you are now and where you would like to be. And finally, communicate with management. First, use the results of your assessment to inform management. As much as I'm sure your managers would love another spreadsheet on their desks, I would encourage you to use your risk assessment to tell a story. Let them know of some of the challenges that are facing your organization because of remote work and consequences should the risks occur. All hope is not lost because there are some good things you're doing now to protect your data and manage that risk, but it could be better. So you should also use the results to request their assistance. Find out what the long-term strategy is for remote work and potentially use your knowledge and your information on the risks to help influence this conversation. With the strategy in mind, you can ask for resources needed to close those gaps in your control maturity and encourage their support as you work to implement new controls. So let's walk through an example together of what this might look like. To set our stage, we're going to say we have team members working from home long-term. Starting with exploitation by cyber attack, we know this is a key risk because it has an extreme inherent likelihood and potential damage. I know we don't allow team members to run as local administrators. I also know we use anti-malware, we encrypt data, and security awareness is part of our culture. So now we ask the question, do these controls reduce risk to an acceptable level? I would say no. While they offer good benefits, there's still room to grow. So in an upcoming report to management, I might say something like, in recent evaluations, we have discovered an extreme risk of exploitation by cyber attack on our remote operations. This could expose our organization to heightened operational, financial, reputation, and legal consequences. Certain controls are in place, but we are missing some key controls which could reduce the risk to an acceptable level. I recommend we implement new patch management processes and request that we tune our intrusion detection systems to increase alerts while we adjust to this new environment. What I hope this shows you is that by investing a few hours into a remote work IT risk assessment, you can build a strong foundation from which you can then use to create a business case for investing in the tools and techniques you need to move forward and grow your business. And with that, I am going to wrap things up. Thank you all so much for joining me here and for engaging with me today. Special thanks to RSA for an incredible conference and for the opportunity to visit with all of you. It has been a pleasure, and I hope that we can continue this conversation. My contact information is here on the slide, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions about remote work risk management, or if you'd like assistance with developing your risk assessments, policies, training, and beyond. I would also like to offer a complimentary resource as a thank you for joining. You can download a remote work IT risk assessment spreadsheet by following the link on the slide to our website, tandem.app/remoteworkra-template. I will be answering questions in the session for a few more minutes as they continue to come through, and would love to continue this conversation with you in an interactive Q&A session immediately following. So thank you so much for attending, and I hope you all have a great day.